Dr. Shefali, welcome to the Motherly Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, you advise others, you write books, you coach other people on parenting. But at first, I'm curious about you. How do you think becoming a mother transformed you and maybe made you a more conscious and awakened person?
It irrevocably and undeniably transformed me. And the way it did that is to show me several things. One, how little I was living in the present. And, when you have an infant and a toddler, you have to be in the present. Otherwise, you will not only destroy, the house, them, and your own sanity. So the only way to live is in the present. So you begin to realize how little you've been living in the present. And then it began to show me how anxious I was and how controlling I was and how these were related to my own childhood wounds. And so it gave me an opportunity to really examine myself. And, I was already a meditator, but it taught me how to meditate in a living, breathing way that I had never done before. And also taught me how unconscious I was. And so that was a huge, ego blow and, a big shot to my arrogance and brought me to my knees, to humility. But also, because I was on a spiritual path of wanting to become more conscious, it really catapulted that journey. And it was very profound, so much so that then I began writing books about it. So, when you say that, I advise others on how to parent, I cringe. Or when I'm being introduced, by anyone and they're like, oh, she's the conscious parenting expert. I really cringe because it gives the appearance that I'm infallible. And it's really out of my fallibility that I'm the best teacher, So it's because I'm so in touch with how delusional I am and how much of a control freak I am. And I'm brave enough to say it, that I'm actually a better teacher. But it's not because I'm perfect that I'm a good teacher. It's because I'm really pretty abysmal at my own parenting every day. But I learn from it. You see, that's why I'm a good teacher, is because I'm a good student of my own unconsciousness.
When you look back maybe to early motherhood, a lot of our listeners are new moms. And then also I'm curious now, are there particular moments or experiences that you really point to as transformational in realizing your own unconsciousness? I'm curious what those might be.
Well, I think, in the early years of parenting, when the kid is really not at fault,
Right.
it's an infant, they can't fall asleep, or they're a toddler and they messed up and put, white flour all over your kitchen, but because they'd never seen white flour before. Or one day I walked into the bathroom and my daughter had, body lotion all over the place. I think every parent goes through some version of flour or lotion.
Yes.
or kidney beans or something, to toilet paper. And, I never lost my crap, but I saw my internal tape in the early years, but especially around sleep, you're so exhausted. And I began to notice how little I wanted to surrender to the present moment and how I wanted to control this kid and how I was willing in my head to make the kid a bad kid. Bad kid, go to sleep, you're upsetting mommy. And I would hear the internal tape because I was a meditator even then. And sometimes I'd even get annoyed. But I knew it wasn't the kid, right? Like with your partner or with your best friend or with your boss, you can somehow pretend it was them because they're adults. But when it's clearly, a little puppy or an infant, it's you who's effed up, right? So when I saw that, and I couldn't blame anyone, you can't rationally blame an infant. If you're crazy, you could. You can't rationally blame a dog or a puppy or a horse, for not following you. That you're the crazy one. So when I began to see that I'm the crazy one, that really was like, God, I got to do some work on myself. And, we all have that opportunity to see we're crazy. And only parenting does that. In every other relationship, you can blame the other one's parents. You can go, it's my husband's mom, or you can blame someone else's parents. But when it's you, you're like, oh my God, I'm the parent, right? Now who to blame? And then you realize that, you got to do this inner work. And so for me, as, shocking as it was, because I was pretty brave to look in the mirror in a very, you hear me, I'm honest about myself. But as shocking as it was very liberating for me, because I understood the purpose of my mothering. My mothering was not about mothering my child only. It was also mothering my own unmet needs, my own anxious self, my own, unmitigated needs and desires and expectations. And so then I slowly began to chip away. By then I'd already messed up my daughter, but hopefully I can help other moms mess up less. By the time I got all this wisdom, my daughter was already 7 and 8 and totally messed up. But I was trying,
Well, I want to talk a bit about parenting as this opportunity for personal growth. I mean, you just talked about how much it awakened you to how much was still unhealed in you, even as a meditator. And you've said every person on the planet is actually a parent in the sense that they have an inner child to tend to. So I'm wondering, kind of as we walk through what you know about conscious parenting, can you help us anchor on that foundation of what is the inner child? How do we learn to parent that inner child? And what about parenting in particular makes that work so critical?
So the inner child is the parts within us that were unseen and unmet. And because of that, we've created this false story that we aren't worthy. So this whole idea of being unworthy is actually a complete false story, because we should have never even begun creating such a story. There's no such thing. We're all worthy. Dogs don't go around asking, am I worthy? Right? Birds don't ask this. They just do their thing. But we humans, because we overthink and over-obsess, we have developed this idea that we're unworthy. And because our parents didn't know any better, they contributed to this story that we are unworthy, and they projected their story of unworthiness onto us. So now we are all walking around with these gaping huge holes that think can be met. We think that these holes can be fulfilled and met and healed by validation from the outside. So that's the second delusion. So now we go on this quest, motherhood, partnerhood, career, looking skinnier, looking prettier, to go and fill these holes. Now, because in the first place, the hole was created out of a delusion, and then the second place that we should go find the answer on the outside, we have now 2 or 3 wrong steps. So we're really down the labyrinth of falsehood. So we go looking for beauty and love and worth and significance on the outside, and use our children, our partners, our careers, our identities to give us a sense of worth. And we keep slipping and we never find it. We never find it. And the secret then becomes the awakening. And the awakening process is where you begin to realize that I was always worthy. And it's actually in the stripping away of the identity of motherhood and taking away the significance I got from my career and from my looks and from my money or whatever, that actually I find my infinite essence, right? So you go through this stripping process to come back to what you should have always had from childhood, but which was robbed from us. What was robbed from us was this sense of worth that we were born with, and it was replaced by this idea that we're to go look for worth through our grades, through our success, through our career, through our achievement. So then we go off course, go looking for worth, never find it, and then some of us just die never having found it. And some of us realize it isn't to be found, it was always there, right? So this is this whole process you go through.
In The Awakened Family, you write about this. You wrote, and I want to underline every part of the book, but this one really jumped out at me. we are triggered not by our children, but by our own unresolved emotional issues. So can you flesh that out for our listeners? What do you mean by that?
Sure. There's this huge mythology in parenthood, and I used to have it before I stopped having it, that our children, know our triggers, and they just know how to trigger us.
Push our buttons.
And push our buttons, those children. And it was actually only in 2015 that I was on stage at my first Evolve conference that the epiphany hit me that there is no such thing. We got to stop talking about our children like this. There is no such thing. I knew that in meditation, that there is no trigger on the outside, but I had conveniently decided that children are different and they are triggers, but they aren't triggers. And how do we know that? It's because your kid may not trigger me and my kid may not trigger you, but they trigger us. And every trigger is not the same, right? So for every person, it just keeps changing. And changes by age, and changes by day, and changes by mood, and changes by how we feel about ourselves. So it just goes to show that the trigger, any emotional charge, is really coming from a place inside, because we have a misplaced expectation, a misplaced need, a misplaced desire. We expected our toddler to listen. We expected our husband to love us. We expected our best friend to remember our birthday. And we can yell and scream at the other, and maybe we're even right, but we're not wise. So being right is not the same as being wise. And wisdom says, okay, you got angry, and maybe you were right. But why did you get so angry? Why did you have to scream on the top of your lungs? Why did you have to do this in this unwise way? So people who are on the path lose their shit, but then they come back and ask, why did I? Right. What about me was so hungry for that we got so triggered? So when you begin to ask these kinds of questions, you're willing to look at every quote-unquote conflict and unpleasant situation as an invitation to heal the self.
So many invitations in parents, so many opportunities in parenting to heal yourself. It's
yes,
incredible.
And you obviously wanted many because you have how many
I needed
children?
A lot of healing. Yes, 4 kids.
Because you knew you don't pay attention the first time. You're like, no, I need many reminders.
Many. So you have really led a movement called the conscious parenting, and so many popular books, TED Talks, just Oprah, everything, and leading a generation really of parents into a new way of parenting. I'm wondering if you could help define what is conscious parenting, what's the goal of conscious parenting, and then how is that different than traditional parenting, and how many of us were raised?
Yes. Very, very, very different. So conscious parenting really is about the parental self. It's raising of the parental self to a higher state of evolution. All roads lead back to the parent. That's conscious parenting. In traditional parenting, there's no such thing. It's you are there to fix the child, create the child, curate the child, produce the child. The child is there to be at your beck and call, to obey and follow your commands, and to be there at your will. In conscious parenting, it is not that you are at the child's commands either. It's about understanding why you need the child to be an obeyer or follower. And instead of the traditional hierarchical dominant way of parenting in traditional parenting, conscious parenting understands that you are the leader when the child is young, but you are a leader with wisdom, and you lead collaboratively. You lead understanding that the quote-unquote essence or soul or whatever you want to call the being state of the child is developing and needs to develop as autonomously and as interdependently as possible. So we do not rob the autonomy of the child, and we do not enmesh with the child. So there is a healthy interdependence, but there's also an understanding that the child is the leader in their own ways and their own destiny. So do you try to give vegetables to the child in conscious parenting? Of course. But you don't shove the carrots down. You negotiate and you're willing to settle at peace, right? You understand? So it's not an abnegation of all good sense. You know, people always, when they hear me talk, literally it's so disappointing because after 2 hours of me thinking I'm creating wisdom or at least igniting wisdom, They say, oh, so we can just smoke pot with our kids and let them just get drunk and, paint their nails at the age of 2. And I go, where did you hear that? Because it evokes such fear, what I'm saying, that I'm asking them to let go of the traditional model, that parents go, oh, you must be talking about smoking crack and cocaine and, snorting whatever, all sorts of substances. That's what you must be talking about. Because people are so afraid to even explore a new way, they just go the other way. Oh, are you saying that we should just let our kids run wild? Are you saying that our kids should be in control of us? Are you saying? And I go, no. All I'm saying is that the traditional way is punitive, it's shame-based, it's control and fear-based, and there's a whole other way to parent that not only benefits the kid, but evolves you and heals you, and doesn't involve shame, doesn't involve pain to the degree that traditional parenting, anchors itself on. So let's try to open our minds to a new way. But because I'm quote-unquote challenging the parental dominance and blind authority, parents don't like that,
Parents don't like that. Sometimes grandparents don't like that. Sometimes extended family doesn't like that. But, as you said, it's not about not having boundaries. It's about being a wise leader and modeling what emotional regulation and well-being looks like for your kids, at least in my experience. So I'm wondering if we could actually look at a few really common everyday examples that we face as parents and what it would look like to process those moments from the point of view of conscious parenting. So
sure.
Let's start with a really common one. Our kid is having a tantrum. For example, my son, he's 2, okay? He hates when I put him in the car seat. I'm wrestling, he's screaming, it's a whole thing. So your toddler's having a tantrum. What does that, 5-minute conscious parenting journey look like in that moment?
So toddler tantrums are so ubiquitous, they are so triggering to us. And as you grow older as a parent, you realize more and more how you were losing your shit on a little puppy dog. Your toddler's entire cerebral cortex is undeveloped. It's like a big hole in their brain. And we're asking them to calm down, not be scared, use their words, don't use your teeth, don't yell. And literally, we are talking Chinese to a Spanish speaker, right? It's literally that alien to them. We're talking nonsense. So toddler tantrums are absolutely normal because they don't have frustration tolerance skills yet. Adults don't have frustration tolerance skills. We just go drink and do more sophisticated looking things like gossip and smoke and drink and on the sly, right? But they're not stealthy that way. They're just open and transparent and here I am, this is what I am, and this is scaring me. And they're full of fear because they don't understand the world. They don't have language. They don't have a freaking brain yet, a fully developed brain. We don't have it till our 30s, I think, if even. So when we get frustrated with a toddler, it's akin to telling the clouds not to create rain. It is just their natural way. So we need to look at ourselves at that point. So say we've lost our shit. We've yelled at the toddler as if it's an adult, yelled at our partner for, contributing his or her genes because that's the problem. And we've yelled at everyone and gone and eaten a bucket of ice cream, right? So now what? Now we have a choice to look at, okay, if I want to do this consciously, my first place to begin is myself. So what were my expectations? Oh, and then you talk to a coach or a therapist and you realize that your expectations were completely unrealistic. You had 10,000 shoulds of this poor being. All were unrealistic. It's like asking a puppy to be toilet trained, right? It's unrealistic. So when you begin to ask that question, you then go a little deeper and go, why do I have that expectation? So not only because I'm clueless, it's also because I think my kid, because I'm grandiose, I think my kid should be different. And then you go down this deconstruction process, and then you realize that you actually only became a parent to have a minion and a puppet and a soldier in your army. So then you begin to realize that, oh, you only became a parent because you're selfish and full of fantasies, and actually you don't want to be a parent of the real kid. You want to be a parent of the kid in your fantasy. And when you go through this process, you realize so many truths about yourself. And then you begin to develop the antidote skills of breathing and pausing and compassion and understanding. And this is the journey. You lose it, and then you have a choice to deconstruct and become aware or not. And then you have to develop the antidotal skills of consciousness, of awareness.
Well, that's a lot. That's a lifelong journey, and I know that never ends. Let's talk about maybe an example you may have faced with an older child. So I read that your daughter at one point wanted to quit ballet, and you worked through the process of, well, I'll let you tell it. What happened when she wanted to quit, and what did a conscious parenting approach look like for your family there?
Right. So again, you first resist reality and you're like, no, you should do what I want. And my expectation and my fantasy was that you would, be in the Nutcracker. And why are you doing this to me? And, you take it personally. It's about you. And so most parents just unleash that, make the kid feel ashamed and guilty, and hopefully coerce the kid into a few more years till the kid becomes bulimic or an alcoholic, right? So, but at least we got a few more years, right? So if you want to be conscious, then you have a collaboration with the kid. You begin to understand the kid, and you begin to shed your own fantasies. I teach parents all the time that there are two kinds of boundaries we should have, because everyone wants to know, what are boundaries? How do we have boundaries with our kids? And I tell them that they can be divided very quickly and very easily into life-enhancing boundaries and ego-enhancing boundaries. Meaning, if it's a boundary about something that's life-enhancing, then you have to enforce it. As in, if your kid needs insulin, if your kid needs radiation, or, it's going to save their life, or I'm not saying radiation is the answer, but whatever, it's a cancer, it's a big deal, they got a huge gash, they need stitches. That's life-enhancing. Having a shower is pretty life-enhancing, going to poop. Right? So then those things you got to kind of have to find a creative, playful way, because creativity and playfulness is the language of children, to make that done, right? To create that boundary. But all the other stuff, like playing the trombone, standing on your head, speaking in sign language or in 3 languages, and ballet, sorry to say, are ego-driven. And how do you know that? Anything that's not universal and that's not your natural way of survival is coming from this man-made ego of ours, or woman-made ego, and we need to examine it. Is it really going to make a big difference in my kid's life? Is it really life-enhancing? No, it's coming from my Western ideological desire for her to stand on her damn toes, and suffer, and put wood in the shoes. I mean, if you really think about it, it's kind of insane. No giraffe would do that. But no, we think it's amazing because it looks so pretty. And I'm not knocking ballet dancers down. I don't want a tirade against me. I'm just, if you deconstruct all our constructions, you'll see that they're pretty insane, right? So when you can laugh at them and then realize that it's coming from our own ego, then you can negotiate, squeeze another month or 2, and then let it go.
It's a really good example. We've already faced a few of those as a family ourselves, and I know there'll be more to come, especially as my kids get older and want to be who they are more rather than who I thought they would be or what I want them to be.
Yeah. By the time my daughter was 12, when she quit ballet, was 13. I knew I was pushing it till 13. And I was just waiting for her to tell me, now enough. You wanted this. It's not me. She told me clearly, it's not me, it's you. So I don't even think, I barely protested because I just knew I was going to lose. Because I already knew I was fake. I was coming out of my ego. There was no real need for her to go for ballet. It's just something I liked.
When I read your books, I find a real coherence to them, a radical awakening, which is about women, especially, awakening to their own healing in this patriarchal society, then the conscious parents and the awakened family. It's like we're all nestled within these systems, and you're trying to help us to be healthier as this broader unit. Is that how you see it, that it's got to start with the self and it sort of ripples out into the family? Because I think something I personally wrestle with is it would be easier to be a conscious parent if I lived in a family without any dysfunctions, right? So can you paint the picture of what happens in an ideal world in these ripple effects of consciousness, but then how we live in the real world, not the ideal world, right? Where there's trauma and dysfunction and people who don't agree and those kinds of things. Because I could buy in, but we live in a world where not everyone has bought in.
So one of the main keys of all my books is to burst the bubble, which means to see through this matrix that we're living in and to understand its cultural ubiquitous dysfunction, its capitalistic greed, its egoic dominance for power. The patriarchy is not the problem. It could be a patriarchy or matriarchy, or it could be that's not the problem. The problem is the toxic part of it. And we women are part of the toxic part of it, and men suffer too. So the toxic part of it is the dominance to the point of abuse. For example, dominance is part of life, right? We parents are more dominant over our children, or we're leaders. But it's when we abuse that, when we've abused the earth and children and women, or even lesser than men, black men, men of color, they're being abused too. So it's that toxicity that we need to wake up to. And we need to examine how we are co-creating that and how we play into that. So a big part of the awakening process is to realize the toxic messages of the culture and how we participate in it. So for example, in my book, A Radical Awakening, which is for women, women will complain all the time that we're being objectified. But in my humble opinion, no one objectifies women more than women. I think I objectify myself more than anyone in my life. No one is looking at my earlobes, but I am. And I'm looking at the fat on one nostril compared to the other because we're insane. No, you are too. I know you look at your body, every part of it. Nobody else is looking at it. And no one else is crucifying you to the degree you are.
I do a thought experiment just to help myself cope with it. And I'm like, I know that 99.9% of my thoughts are about me, and everyone else on the planet is the exact same way. They are not obsessing about all the things that we obsess about, for sure.
And we women are driving ourselves crazy. For what? For men that we know, or other partners, it doesn't have to be male, that we know are as crazy as us. Like, what are we doing to ourselves? If we see the latest eyelash extension, we want to have better eyelashes. Then we want to have better noses. Then we want to have better cheeks. Then we want to have better cheekbones. Then we want to have better jaws. I mean, just on the face, we want to do a million things. I know, because every time something new comes, I'm like, oh, first I didn't even know I had a problem. Then I want to fix it, right? Like the other day, I went to the dentist. I didn't know I had all these crooked teeth, but now she told me, now I'm obsessed with my crooked teeth. And I got so upset with her. I was like, I just came for a teeth cleaning. I didn't need perfect teeth, but now you've told me I have imperfect teeth. Why? Why did you put that in my mind? But it's not her fault, of course. Why do I buy into it? So in all these ways, I show parents, I show adults, I show women, how we have bought into toxic messages that are killing us. So in terms of parenthood, my book, The Awakened Family, I talk about the 7 mythologies that we parents have bought into, which have made us miserable. We've made ourselves miserable because we've bought into the idea, for example, that our children should be happy. I've bought into this one hook, line, and sinker, haven't you? Right? Are you letting it go?
No, I mean, I actually saw early on, I saw the harm of just wanting your kid to be happy at any cost. So it's been something I've tried to not prioritize. Personally, I prioritize meaning over happiness.
Yes. But I still fall into it. I'm so happy when my kid is happy. right? And when she's sad, I'm like, oh, damn, it's such an inconvenience, you know? So these things are toxic messages that we have inculturated that we need to do the work on to disidentify from. No one is going to do that for us. So the coherence that you see in my books is this constant, you know, rampaging against cultural toxic messages and telling us how we have been played into, we've been played by and playing into them, you know.
Can you talk a little bit more about those cultural messages? Because, you know, we're like fish swimming in the sea and we don't even know we're in the water. I think that was from one of your books. We don't even realize that we're in a culture, right? Until we do this process of awakening. I'm thinking about things like, you know, getting into a good college and how much that cultural need, and not just cultural, because also economic. There's external factors pressuring us, right? Getting into a good college, looking a certain way, doing certain activities, you know, it creates so much pressure. I'm wondering, what are those big ones that you see that our listeners might not even be aware of are coming from a toxic culture, a toxic society?
Yeah, well, your listeners will soon be depressed if they haven't read my books, because it's literally out the gate. Like the moment the kid is in the womb, that's it. Now the parent wants to have a successful pregnancy. Then the parent does all sorts of medical interventions. So you're dependent on the pharmaceutical industry, the drug industry, the medical industry, all artificial. And then you give the kid a name, then a last name, and that is loaded with tradition and ritual and meaning. That comes idiosyncratic to that family. It's not real. It's not out in nature. It's just what that family decides. This family is a conservative Orthodox family. That family is a liberal family. That family is a hippie family. And each one thinks they're amazing, right? Mormon, Jewish, Amish, right? So right off the bat, we are telling the kid who to pray to. You know, we don't even question, right? So we tell them how to pray, who to pray, when to pray. Then it's how to go to school. The fact that they have to go to school. What kind of school? And like you said, a lot of it is economical, right? As much as I'm against aspects of the public school education, I wasn't going to pay $20,000 on a private school education. It was economics. And I'm happy because most private schools are just glorified public schools, you know. So anyway, not to knock public school education at all. I think it has a lot of merit as well, and a lot of downsides as well, as everything in life. But every step of the way, right? Our sexuality, our gender expression, our beauty, our achievements, our getting married, all these milestones, getting pregnant, are all the ocean we swim in and don't realize. And then how to be in there. We're supposed to be happy. We're supposed to be cheerful and optimistic. And, you know, so all these things, obedient, all these things are ingrained in us, and we don't realize that they are optional, really. They're not mandatory. And by the time you wake up to realize, hey, that was an option? No one told me that was an option? You're pissed because you're 80 years old, and now it's too late to be gay. You know, you're like, oh, now might as well just stay with this in this straight relationship. Now I know why I was miserable all this time. Well, things are changing now, of course, but in our generation, you know, we didn't have many options. And this generation is going all out, the current generation. They're like, I'm going to create every option, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M. All the letters are going to be in my options. So the list of boxes has gotten even longer, which is just a reaction to the control of our generation.
I want to talk a little bit more about generations. You know, I have many friends and readers, even on Motherly's website. We know how popular these approaches to parenting are: positive parenting, conscious parenting. Our readers are hungry for this point of view. And in many cases, it's because they are awakening to the way that they were raised and the harms and things that they've had to heal in themselves because of that. So they go and they read the books and they do the meditations and they commit, and maybe they're even successful at implementing it in their own household. But then they might have time with grandparents or aunts and uncles or friends who are not, quote unquote, awakened to this other way of nurturing the development of a child. Do you have any advice for maybe people who are really trying to be on that journey, but then have to encounter and be challenged by those who aren't and are also stuck in the way that, they raised their own children?
Sure. It's really difficult when you are dealing with cross generations. And it's not our goal and our role to change them. It's really to embody your own level of consciousness. When you learn conscious parenting, you learn a lot more than just, a few strategies. You learn a strategy for life, which includes how to deal with obstinate, stubborn parents and in-laws. You learn how to deal with them because you begin to learn about their inner child and their ego. And so conscious parenting kind of encompasses everything. When you're conscious, you're just naturally more positive because you learn to handle the negative, right? It's not about one strategy or another. It's a lifestyle that you begin to develop, a wisdom that allows you to understand other people in your milieu better.
Even when it's hard, and I often remind myself, especially when it's hard, I think that I try to look at those moments myself as this is a really challenging interpersonal dynamic. And because it's so challenging, this is where my personal growth is going to be able to come from. If I'm lucky, if I'm resourced, if I'm present to that experience.
Right. There is no evil other grandpa or father-in-law or sister-in-law. There is no witch out there. It's who we make a witch. And we can always learn to walk away. We can always learn to be at peace. So conscious parenting teaches us all these tools to handle the unconsciousness of others.
Yes, it does.
I mean, that's really the challenge of life, is handling the unconsciousness of others. But you can only handle the unconsciousness of others when you have a grip on your own madness.
That's right. So you've talked a bit. I want to talk about this concept of the vital needs of the child. Because the reality is, as parents raising young kids, most of what we do throughout our days is deal with the acute needs of the child. You've identified 3 vital needs and how understanding them helps deal with our kids' most disruptive behaviors. So what are those? What's that concept about? And then can you walk me through how we can identify these needs?
What needs are you talking about? Containment, connection, and skill?
Yes.
Yeah, when somebody does so much research, I'm like, what has she done? This is from my Conscious Parenting 2.0 course.
Yes.
You did that course?
We had the notes pulled from it in our research.
Very good. I've created actually a course called the Conscious Parenting 2.0 method, where I talk about the 3 core needs. And I'm actually going to give your audience members a 15% code, so you can give it to them later.
Thank you.
For your audience to this method. And I'm actually writing a book on it now. It's my next book. And I identify the 3 core needs of children. And if we can kind of systematize our minds as parents, because it's so confusing, then we can kind of go down the path, right? And that's what I've created in this course. So the 3 core needs are connection, containment, or skill building. And kids need a milieu of these all the time, but you can systematize your thinking as a parent to go, okay, how can I connect? Do they need a boundary? What is the skill that they're missing, right? And I then teach what are the skills of connection. And those are empathy building, non-judgmentality, neutrality. So I teach these skills to connect with your kid better, because there are ways to connect with your kid better. It's how to turn a no into a yes, how to listen to the unmet need, how to understand what is the feeling beneath the behavior. These are skills, and parents don't have that. So I teach that in this course, so if people are interested, but just to say that in a nutshell. And then the second set of skills are these boundary skills. Asking, is this a life-enhancing boundary or is this an ego-enhancing boundary? Is this a stone boundary or a sand boundary? So I help parents, again, systematize their thoughts so they can begin to go, okay, in this moment, if my kid is, it's been 14 days since my kid has had a shower, what quote unquote push can I create to help my kid go for a shower? Can I push it? And yes, you can. But how do you do it in a way that builds their skills? So the third thing is skill building. What skill is my kid missing? Is my kid missing the skill of body awareness? Is my kid missing the skill of organization, timeliness? What is my kid missing that my kid is missing that he needs to go for a shower, right? Is my kid just depressed, right? So all psychological skills, emotional skills, life skills. So when we begin to understand kids' needs in these ways, then we're not all over the place. We have a method, and my first 3 books on parenting were the how and the why of conscious parenting. And now I've come up with, the how of parenting, not just the what and the why.
Those 3 are so incredibly helpful: connection, containment, and skill building. And at any given time, because my kids right now range from age 2 to 9 and are all different parts of their developmental planes, they all need all of this in varying degrees at any given time. But I really do find those 3 components really, really helpful. Let's see here. I know we're very close to time. Can you help paint a picture of what it looks like to really commit to raising this, self-aware child who is, celebrated for their uniqueness? What would it look like, not just for an individual family to do that, to raise a child in a fully conscious way, but what would it look like for a generation to commit to raising their children in that way?
Well, you can't be fully conscious, yes? It's always a process and a journey. But yes, if there was a generational commitment, it would do away with all sorts of physical, corporal punishment. I mean, that is just the lowest vibration, so we have to let go of that. It would attempt to repair all sorts of, emotional outbursts, such as yelling and cursing at your kid. It would attempt to not simply produce childhood and really see childhood as an end to itself. It's not a means to an end, it's an end to itself. It's a complete life stage. It's the most amazing life stage of life. And it would commit to parents healing themselves, And so think about all the shame that would be sloughed off, all the excess, undue, unnecessary guilt and unworthiness that we've been holding on our shoulders. All that would be sloughed off. No need for all that, because so, for example, when I yell at my kid, even today, I may yell at my kid, she's 18 and a half, even though when I yell at her, she'll yell right back at me, tell me I'm wrong. But say I was particularly in a bitchy mood, what that would look like is me going back to her and going, okay, mom lost her shit. I'm sorry. I'm human, and I'm going to work on it. So then the kid knows, okay, mom is human. I'm human too. I don't need to be perfect. She's not perfect. And guess what? Her madness and her anger toward me had nothing to do with me, right? I contributed, I co-created, but it's not all me. And in the traditional parenting paradigm, it's so heavily child-focused that the child thinks that they are the cause of all their parents' moods and that they are responsible for the parents' moods. Right. And because parents haven't abnegated their responsibility and made it all about the kid being at fault, right? So high accountability as parents, high responsibility, high inner reflection, inner contemplation. It's a little bit annoying to be a conscious parent because you kind of have to think about all
yes,
the crap
it is.
that you say.
I agree with you. That sometimes I feel fatigued, like when you're examining. Why did I do that?
So annoying.
It is. It would be
so
easier sometimes.
Yes, ignorance is bliss. That's why there's the adage, ignorance is bliss. Awareness is a bitch, let me tell you. And because you're like, oh my God, now you're aware what you did. You can't just bloody curse at your kid and yell at them anymore.
But sometimes you're not, speaking for myself, sometimes I don't even I know there's a trigger, but I can't even consciously figure out what it is in that moment, right? That's just that
I know, I
sort of
know.
ghost
I know.
feeling.
Yes, yes, something's taken over you.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there's a code for our listeners who may want to take your parenting course. Can you share that information?
Yeah, so this latest parenting course I did is called the Conscious Parenting 2.0 Method. And I think every parent should take it really. I mean, I love it because it's concrete. It's a real method. It's step by step. It simplifies everything. And I have a code for your community. It's called 15 off. So 15% off, 15 off.
Great.
So go to my website under courses and it should be able to take you there.
Perfect.
And really the website, and really the website that I can give you is theconsciousparent.com. That's the website for the course.
Okay. Thank you. At Motherly, we believe that motherhood brings out our superpowers. I often talk about those as characteristics, forces within us that we maybe didn't even know were there until we became a parent. So I'm wondering, what do you see as your superpower?
I think my superpower is humility and compassion. I didn't know compassion more than even humility, so I didn't know how compassionate I could be. It's made me more compassionate towards every human being. I mean, I don't know whether you felt this, but after my child was born, literally I began to realize how little I knew, how little I was compassionate towards other people. I began thinking of all the pregnant women I was never nice to enough on the bus, on the train. I began to have compassion for older people because it makes you humble. That's why I put them both together, because parenting shows you how ordinary you are, how your kid may not be Einstein at all, even close. I mean, thank goodness, not even, they have nicer hair, but all the rest, like they may not be Julia Roberts, they may not be who you thought. So it makes you humble. And that humility brings about compassion. You see that you're ordinary, you see that you have a temper, you see that you don't know how to do this, and your kid can fall ill and you don't have control, and the labor hurts you. So you then begin to realize how much pain other people are in. I don't know, but that's what it did for me.
Totally. Dr. Shefali, thank you so much for all your work and wisdom and for joining us today on the Motherly podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and for all the work that you do in the world.
Thank you.